So I work for FMC Corporation. We have a carrageenan processing plant up in Rockland, Maine. One thing we do in FMC, we have a safety culture. Safety is first. So one thing I'd like to mention is, as Blaine mentioned, these are the exits. God forbid if there's an emergency, we have to exit the building into 0-degree weather. Those are the exits, and that's the lobby, and out we go. Okay. Ah, well, there you go. All right. The next slide, we're already on the beach in Bali. Okay. Before I start the story of our of carrageenan seaweed, I want to give you a little bit of a background on seaweed in general and commercial seaweeds. Okay. Seaweeds we can divide them up into three groups: the red, the browns, and the greens. There's about 6,500 species of red algae, of seaweed, 1,800 brown algae, including the kelps and the rockweed we have here. Green algae, like the ulva, the sea lettuce we have here, 1,500 species. Of all those, there's probably less than 50 that we can say are commercial seaweeds that are either harvested or cultivated for commercial use. But of those 50 or so species, it's over a $6 billion industry. And the way we can divide it up is, 90% food nutrition, your Japanese restaurant type seaweeds, 8% phycocolloids, the business of FMC, 2% agriculture for, say soil enhancers, plant food. And then you probably have heard quite a bit over the last 8-10 years about energy, biofuels from seaweed, and it's still research and development. And of course, $50 a barrel oil doesn't promote that research very well. Okay, so maybe in 10, 20, 30 years, we can put a number under energy. The phycocolloids there's basically three types. Alginate, which is from the brown, the kelps. Agar, coming from certain red seaweeds. Carrageenan, which is also from certain red seaweeds. And there are basically three types of carrageenan: kappa, iota, lambda. Kappa produces a strong gel, iota a weak gel. You might find it in toothpaste. And the lambda is no gel, and you might find that in drinks. And I won't this is about as technical as we're going to get, but the molecules you see along the bottom of the slide are the kappa, iota, and lambda. And I've circled the sulfate groups. And basically, the way carrageenan gels is illustrated in the diagram at the top. And they form a double helix, and then those combine, and then you get your gel with water or milk. But if you have a lot of the sulfate groups, like lambda, those double helixes cannot form. The sulfate groups get in the way, so you don't get a gel. And now that's about all I'm going to do to talk about carrageenan chemistry tonight, okay? Three types of carrageenan. This will be a little bit important because FMC will source different types of seaweeds depending on the type of carrageenan they produce. Okay, a little bit about carrageenan and its benefits to us. First of all, it's a natural ingredient derived from the seaweed. It's actually been extracted and used for centuries, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. And what does it do? Well, it's a gelling, thickening, emulsification agent in various foods, and providing stability, texture, and consistency to those foods and drinks. And the extraction process, although we have a multi-million-dollar factory up in Rockland, on a basic level, you could do it in your kitchen, which was done for centuries in Ireland and Brittany, France. Now our story begins. We'll talk about when people first started harvesting a North Atlantic seaweed called Chondrus crispus or Irish moss is a question, but certainly it's been going on for hundreds of years. So we can just say that from the 18th century and before, Irish moss was harvested in Ireland and Brittany, France, and parts of the UK. People just would boil it with milk and make a milk pudding, and that was a very common thing to do. I live just in a town bordering South Boston, and 30 minutes below me is Seaweed. And in 1847, Irish immigrant fishermen had recognized that there were rock shelves off the coast, and they were full of Irish moss. And the stories I read was that there were people in Boston, chemists, who wanted to use it as a thickener in cough syrup they were making. So a commercial industry was started. Even though it was home use in Europe for many years, centuries, the commercial industry started in the United States. Then we can jump ahead about 120 years or so, and Sea Plant Corporation in Seaweed, formerly Crimco, had moved a factory to New Bedford, Massachusetts. There was more water and they could operate there. In 1936, Algae Corporation of America started at Rockland, at the site of our plant today. And they were making alginate there, but for Sea Plant Corporation, the first applications that I've read and understand is the history was around chocolate milk. Okay, so that gets us up to the 1930s, and what we have here is that's a picture of a Chondrus crispus plant. There is a museum in Seaweed, and it's open every Sunday afternoon from 1 to 4. And if ever you're down there, please stop by. It's all volunteers. They have a fantastic museum with boats and photos and all the equipment they used to use. It's a really nice experience. And basically, that's how it was harvested, just raking at low tide in 5, 6 feet of water. Okay, so in the 1940s, demand for the seaweed expanded, so New England couldn't provide enough. Harvesting began in Canada, Nova Scotia, Maritimes, EEI. And you can see from that graph there, that goes from 1948. This is total Maritimes harvest, Canadian production. And you see the steady increase up to 1970. In the 1950s, because FMCO, I should kind of hop down to what happened in 1959, where ACA and Sea Plant combined, forming the company called Marine Colloids. They closed the New Bedford, Massachusetts plant, and then the plant in Rockland stayed, and it was then Marine Colloids it stopped the alginate, we were just doing carrageenan. But they're looking for different types of seaweed that have different types of carrageenan. So they were also, in the 50s, started harvesting tropical carrageenan seaweeds, wild harvested in Southeast Asia and East Africa, and actually in the Caribbean. Okay, and that's a photo of the plant, FMC's plant in Rockland today. Okay, then we get to the 60s and 70s, a lot's going on. What the people at Marine Colloids were thinking was there was a limit to the seaweed supply. They started investing in aquaculture research. One thing they were doing was trying to farm chondrus in ponds in Nova Scotia. Another thing they were doing was looking at tropical carrageenan seaweeds, farming those. And they had 2 projects, one in Florida and one in the Philippines. And one of the Philippines, they had partnered with Dr. Maxwell Doty at the University of Hawaii. And the idea there was to take this wild seaweed and see if you could farm it in a vegetative manner. I should say that this, I'll say it on the next slide. So by 1972, they had actually had success with farming the tropical carrageenan seaweeds in the Philippines. And I took this diagram, this chart, from one of Dr. Doty's papers from 1978, and that takes us up to 1973, where we see that the wild harvest declines as the cultivation supply increases. And Dr. Doty said it would go up to 10,000 tons, and it really did. In fact, they produced so much that the carrageenan plants of the world couldn't consume it all, and there was kind of a crash in the market. And we probably had about 4 of those over the decades. However, up in Nova Scotia with the Congress cultivation, it was a biological success, but the costs of producing were way too high for the carrageenan industry. In the later 70s, Marine Coal had sold that operation to a former employee, and he started Acadian Sea Plants Limited. So they did succeed. They produce Congress there today in tanks, but it's sold as food in the Japanese market. Okay, so the story continues, and now we're into the 1970s. This is what's happening with Congress. Now, I showed you before the blue bars up there, up to 1970, and as you see, as the tropical seaweed cultivation supply increased, there's a decline in the demand for Congress. And this is from Western Nova Scotia, the red bars, from 75 to 2009. So the extract from Congress is valuable for certain applications, but probably more applications are based on the widely available cultivated tropical carrageenan seaweeds. And they actually were, once upon a time, harvesting Congress, these sort of beach wash with horses in Prince Edward Island. Now it's more of a tourism thing. And a similar story going on in Massachusetts. This is some data I was able to find from Plymouth. So from 71, I declined to 82, and sad to say that actually the whole harvest industry ended in the late 90s. The gentleman who was running it was getting older, and no one was taking over, and the costs were getting too high, so it ended. But the museum's still there, so please stop by. Next, maybe in the summer, or Pleasant. Every Sunday, 1 to 9, or 1 to 4 p.m. And if this is interesting to you, a friend of mine, Hawk Hickman, was a mosser in Scituate since he was a teenager back in the 60s, and he wrote a book, and you can buy it at his site, you can go to Amazon, but he really has some good stories, a lot of good photos, and I would suggest it. It's $13.95 for his black and white version and $20 for the color. And I get no money from this, all right? I'm just telling you it's a good thing, and he's a good guy. He's a nice guy. And he's very passionate about his mossing days. All right. So then we get into also in the 1970s, again, the desire for different types of carrageenan brings us to the other cold water seaweeds besides Congress. And we started developing sources in Morocco, Mexico, Chile, Peru, and actually Mr. Blakemore here was very involved in developing those new supplies at that time. As well as what we have here, which is the expanding of cultivation beyond the Philippines to, this is an aerial shot of seaweed farms in Bali. So the rectangles are seaweed farms, ready to be harvested, obviously, over a white sandy bottom, and those are the boats. And this gentleman's up on Sulawesi Island paddling in his harvest from his floating farm. And then this is in Zanzibar, and Mr. Blakemore is also highly involved in developing this seaweed supply, which today, that was 1989 started, and today those people are at islands producing, 15,000 tons, which is a lot. 24 tons go in a 40-foot container. So in Zanzibar, they farm intertidal. So it's about a 12-foot tide, and they just walk out and work 3 hours at low tide on the spring tides. In Sulawesi, Indonesia, they have floating systems, and I'll get into all that. So it doesn't really matter how deep it is, as long as your anchor line's deeper, longer. So if we look at the situation today, and I should also mention FMC bought marine colloids in 1977, correct? Yeah. So that's when FMC got into this business and added it to the portfolio. All right, so if we look at the situation today with the global carrageenan seaweed production, over 200,000 tons of seaweed are purchased, and this is industry-wide. FMC is not everything. There's many. Today, the other development would be that there's a lot of factories in Philippines, Indonesia, China, Chile, more in Europe, a couple in Europe. So there's more people in the business, and therefore demanding more seaweed. So 216,000 tons, about over $300 million are going directly to these farmers and harvesters. And it's hard to say how many farmers there are, but let's just say there's over 35,000 seaweed farms. And how many people work on the farms? And these are family farms, so no doubt kids are helping, when they're not in school and all that. And it's almost all cultivated. There are 2 species that are cultivated in the tropics, but very few is ocean harvested anymore, and that would be from, Canada. Well, I can show in the next slide. The tropical seaweeds are cultivated. We're sourcing in Madagascar, Tanzania, Zanzibar, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia. Ocean harvested cold water seaweeds coming from Peru, Chile, Mexico, Canada, and Morocco. All right, so that's the seaweed story up to date. And now, what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of information about how it's farmed, because it's interesting. We can break it down into site selection, farm construction, farm operation, post-harvest handling. And when we look for a site, you see we don't have any pesticides or herbicides. It's totally natural. What is important then is we must be in a location where the seaweed wants to grow. It has a good growth rate so the farmers can make money. Otherwise, they'll get discouraged and quit, and that kind of defeats the purpose. So first thing we look for is a good environment, which is primarily water temperature, water flow, and nutrient availability. But you're also worried about herbivory. You don't want fish eating your seaweed, and epiphytes that will cover it and smother it and make it difficult to grow, as well as to clean it and harvest it. Logistics, you have to get it from that beach onto a container ship. So how far is that? Socioeconomics, if the people are fishing and making a lot of money fishing, is farming something interesting to them? Maybe, maybe not. And politics. Sometimes the politicians are really supportive. Sometimes they're waiting for their piece of the pie. And you've got to really have a good sense for that fast, because that can really cause you a lot of headaches. And of course, shipping costs. We have to ship it to Rockland, so how much does that cost per ton? Some places are much more expensive than others. And then the demographics. You have to have people there. And not everybody in the community wants to be a seaweed farmer, so you have to reckon maybe 10% of the total. Farm construction is basically, this plant grows vegetatively. If you plant something the size of your hand, you just cut off we call them thalli, but say a branch the size of your hand. Hopefully in 6 weeks it grows to the size of a basketball. And then you would cut off another piece the size of your hand and do it again. So you have to have an anchor system and the ropes and some little string to attach it to. And then you can choose a farm system. We have 3 basically. They can do it on a bamboo raft, which is common in parts of Indonesia. Floating long lines, which is common everywhere where they're using floating systems. and then what we call off bottom, where you have a big 12-foot tide and walk out at low tide, and a lot of this gets into the culture too, because, for example, in Zanzibar, a lot of the farmers are women, they don't swim, they don't have access to a boat, so that is perfect for them, just to walk out there at low tide. But in Southeast Asia, everybody knows how to swim by the time they're a year old, and they're very comfortable in the water, and they have boats. All right, so once you've got your farm structure, you've found your location, you've got your farm structure, then you've got to plant the seaweed. So that's just basically taking these lines that have cuttings attached and putting it out there on the anchor system. While it's growing, you have to clean it. This is, again, like the sea lettuce type of pest weed coming over the farms, and these farmers are cleaning. Dr. Doty always said that the best, let me say this properly, the best fertilizer is the shadow of the farmer on the field. You don't get a plant and then leave for 6 weeks. You have to be there every day taking care. And then after 6 weeks, you can harvest it, bring it into the beach, and this is a gentleman up on the northern island of the Zanzibar archipelago in Pemba Island, and this is a shot from a beach in Bali. And then what you'll do is take all this wet seaweed and sort it out. Theoretically, 10% should be cut and replanted, 90% can be dried. So that's what they're doing here. Sitting around, this is actually in Thailand. We had to give up in Thailand because the fish ate everything. We made it a very good effort, but the fish just kept eating all our seaweed. And then you dry it, and I got to change this picture because, wearing rain jackets when we're trying to dry the seaweed, which doesn't indicate that things are going very well. But here we are in Madagascar, and if the sun is out and the wind's blowing, you're looking at 2 to 3 days, and the seaweed's dry. And when it's dry, then it's stable, no bacteria is going to be growing and producing enzymes that will then destroy your carrageenan. So once it's dry, then we sort of go around clockwise here. So this lady's selling her bag of seaweed, ends up in a warehouse where it's baled, then it's taken to the port, and then it's loaded in a container and sent to Rockland. And that's usually, we have supplier companies that do this for us. And we're just dealing with the supplier and working with their team. Their team of trainers and buying station managers to make sure they're doing a proper job and teaching the farmers the right things. Okay, the future. The way I see it, I've been doing this, Bill, it's going to be 25 years on May 9th that I was hired. So I've been doing this 25 years plus a few years in the Peace Corps. And if I look at the future, I would say we're going to see more cultivation, of course, of these tropicals, and more volume every year, and hopefully more temperate water, cold water seaweed farming. But definitely cultivation is the way to go because you get a steady supply and you have more control over the quality. Then, to do that, though, we have, in the world today, we're having growing labor costs, growing costs of living. Right now, that's translating into higher seaweed prices. With every other type of agriculture, you see a drive towards productivity increase. How much, how many bushels per acre, blah, blah. We don't see that so much in this seaweed farming. Basically, they're doing the same thing they were doing in 1970, and costs are going up. So there's got to be a bigger effort to help increase productivity, and I'll have a little slide about that in a bit. We aren't just sitting on our hands here, we are actually trying to do something. And then, this climate change is happening, and those people who work in natural products really know it. I'm sure, how many here have a garden in the summer? And, you're paying attention. It's about when things are blossoming. What time of the year. Things are changing a bit, so we have to pay attention to that. And I'll talk about how that works in the ocean. The future for more cultivation would be, again, more tropical carrageenan seaweed farming continues to grow, and we should be seeing more cold water seaweeds cultivated. Maybe not like up in Nova Scotia, very high cost, but maybe a different way we can do it out in the ocean. Because the cultivation, again, assures the volumes and the quality and the consistency of the product. And maybe the technology of farming will get high-tech, I don't know. This is a diagram from, believe it or not, NASA is looking at algae farming. So far it's just cartoons, but nothing in the water. So, we'll see. This is actually microalgae in plastic bags that somehow explode to the surface. We'll see. I think that goes back to the algae oil. So maybe they'll have to wait until we have $200 a barrel oil. We'll see. There are great benefits to cultivation for these tropical coastal communities. Number one is with growing population, you're seeing more nutrient loading going into the coastal waters with agricultural runoff, as well as with urban runoff. And seaweed farms, usually what happens to a coral system in the tropics is that nutrient loads promote seaweed growth. And they'll overgrow they'll overgrow the corals like you see in the upper right photograph. So seaweed farms, become a nutrient sink. They absorb some of this nutrient that's beneficial. Now, on what scale we're talking, does this really help the corals? I'm not sure. It's probably site specific. The seaweed farms are also primary production, and I said we don't really like the herbivorous fish, but if you lose 5% of your farm to fish, well, you're enhancing the fish population, which the fishermen should thank you for. So that's a benefit. The farms also, a lot of them are planted either they're floating or they're over a sandy bottom. So when you plant those farms, you're creating habitat, and you'll see a lot of juvenile fish swimming around the farms, taking cover in them. Again, you should be enhancing the ecosystem, enhancing the fish population that way. And we have to remember, if these people weren't farming seaweed, they're going to be doing something. And sad to say, in many cases, they're dynamite fishing, coral harvesting, overfishing, using other destructive fishing practices besides dynamite. So, seaweed farming has been noted to be an alternative sustainable livelihood. And the other thing I noticed was when people farm in the ocean, they care a lot about water quality. So if a fisherman starts changing his oil and dumping waste oil next to the seaweed farm, the farmer gets a bit upset. And since they live in the same community, those feelings can be shared. And that helps. It helps increase, protect the water quality, which is good for the seaweed, but also good for everything else that lives in the ocean. So benefits. Here's what I wanted to say a little bit, just like a little case study of improving productivity. Now, on the right side is a traditional way seaweed was farmed in Zanzibar. All right. So it was primarily just women, and they worked alone or with two together. They would have to walk, half a mile out to the farm at low tide, very shallow slope. And then they would have to carry the harvest back. That's wet seaweed, maybe it's, 40 pounds, 60 pounds, and they have to carry it over half a mile. And by the time they turn around, the tide's coming. And that was their harvest for the day. In addition, the farms, because of this lack of transport, farms were small, production small, and we did some surveys with farmers, and we came out to a 1.54 dry kilos per man hour at work. Okay. On the left, up in Pemba Island, the northern island of the Zanzibar archipelago, you see a production per month tenfold. And the difference there is that the husbands were helping the wives, and the husbands had their fishing boats. So they were using the boats to bring in the harvest. Therefore, they could have bigger farms. And when you see their productivity rate, it's over double that of a Podgy farmer. So they work more, but they have bigger farms to work. Okay, so, and what we did was, this gentleman here is using like a little plastic barge, and what I did, I didn't really like their wood boats. The wood boats are just dug out canoes. So it's one tropical hardwood tree cut down to make this boat. It weighs a ton, maybe 5 tons, and it's eaten by worms. So, and they're expensive. They're probably anywhere from $800 to $1,000. So we found a company in Michigan making plastic boats for lakes, just for pond fishing. And they were very helpful, and they created a seaweed barge just out of one of their molds, very wobbly, but it's lightweight, 2 people can carry it easily, and it costs $200, and it lasts forever if it's taken care of. And that boat can carry, 1,000 pounds of wet seaweed with just a 10-inch draft. So that is the kind of, I think I just described the next slide, but that's the kind of answer you need. That's what we call appropriate technology. You open up the container, pass out the boats, and immediately they increase their production tenfold. So you can see this is just a satellite, Google map photo, but those are the farms on the reef edge, and that's all sandy intertidal, and that's the beach, and that's 800 meters, so a little over a half a mile. That's how far they were walking. All right, health and safety. That's important to us at FMC. As I mentioned earlier, it's also important to the farmers because if you step on a sea urchin, if you get sick from drinking dirty water, you're not able to farm. You're not able to have income for your family. It's a problem. So we work hard also with educating farmers about the dangerous marine animals and what to do, and primarily prevention. It's always better not to get sick or not to get injured. And we look out for we call non-government organizations, NGOs. I'm always looking for partners if they're working in our villages where we're sourcing seaweed, that we can do something with them on water sanitation infrastructure projects. And what we've done, these are some recent examples. Probably 10 years ago, we got into bed netting. The World Bank was basically, I was getting nets for half price, and they were manufactured in Tanzania. It was very interesting. And these ones have the insecticide embedded in the plastic, so it was really, really great. So we were able to get bed nets out to probably 1,000 or more farmers. We built a schoolhouse in Madagascar, and it was always in my mind, educated people. If you can calculate, do some math, you're going to be a far more productive farmer because now you're calculating how long things are taking you to do, and how if you increase, you can understand the increase. Also, toilets are important because in parts of Pemba Island in Zanzibar, people walk, one or I'll keep it in miles. So let's say mile and a half, mile to mile and a half to the beach, and these ladies are a bit shy, right? And it's no fun to go into the bushes all the time. So we built some toilets, water sealed, and we have plumbing going in there. So that was a big improvement for them. for their safety as well as for their, well, their happiness, let's just say. Another issue was, footwear, because people were, again, could possibly step on a sea urchin, step on a stingray, right? So rubber boots were ideal. They're high enough that if you hit the stingray, the tail isn't going to still catch you in the shin. So we were able to collect. I passed the hat around my company in Europe and the United States, and we collected enough money to get. Now we're up to 1,200, over 1,200 rubber boots. And finally, I've been trying to promote World Ocean Day, which is June 8th every year, because this is a great way, wherever we are in the world, in Chile or Indonesia or Africa, East Africa, it's a great way to promote beach cleanups, and get people understanding you just don't dump plastic here and there. So what we do is we have these contests, and Bill Blake will also remember Bong there. I have a guy who works for me, and his name is Bong. And I would suggest everyone should have a guy named Bong working for them. He's just a fantastic guy from the Philippines. We found him in the jungles of Borneo back in the early 90s, working on cacao plantations. But Bong, super energetic guy with a great personality, and gets everyone. He speaks probably 12 languages now. This is in north coast of Bali, and we've got everyone collecting plastics off the beach and had contests and games, and it was making a lot of fun. So that was last June. And then climate change. So we're thinking about climate change, and in the ocean or with the aquaculture, what I concern myself with, of course, rainfall, because we solar dry the seaweed. Water temperature is really crucial. These seaweeds we grow have a very narrow range where they grow well, and we do see warming happening, especially during El Niños in East Africa and parts of the Philippines. Typhoon is becoming a problem, and I'll go through all this in detail. But the Philippines, some parts of the world are going to get drier, which again is good for us in aquaculture, drying seaweed. Not good for terrestrial farmers. Can't really say how it's going in the Philippines, but what we can say is during, like right now we're in El Nino, a mild one, but El Nino nonetheless. What we see then is a shorter and drier rainy season in Southeast Asia, Philippines and Indonesia. So El Niños work well for us there, but they create hot water in East Africa, which kills our seaweeds. Win some and lose some. Rising ocean temperatures, so we think about this quite a bit and just monitor it. Every couple of weeks you get these nice maps coming out, and they even tell you by color what to watch out for. And with the typhoons, with warming oceans, the typhoons and the hurricanes become stronger. And as the water warms, normally you can see here, this is decades of typhoons in Southeast Asia and East Asia. So, what you'll see in the little lousy red circle I made is that's the southern Philippines. And in the Philippines, that's probably 70% of the seaweed farms. And that's Mindanao Island. And they've always been below the typhoon path. But with warming waters in southern Philippines, the typhoons are coming farther south. And that's an issue. That's something we have to really be concerned about, for that 70% of the seaweed production from the Philippines. And then rising sea levels. So this is a projection, 93 to 2008. And we're just talking millimeters, all right? But 10 millimeters. But you'll see it's happening in the Philippines. And maybe it's okay for the farms, but a lot of these farmers live on little atoll islands, just a meter above the high tide, and that's an issue for them. So in summary, I just want to I want to say, okay, this was a remarkable story. A few people at marine colloids in the 60s made a decision to pursue the cultivation of tropical carrageenan seaweeds. And here we are 45 years later with over 35,000 farms, $300 million a year going into those communities, and a lot of benefits. The farms are providing a lot of benefits to those coastal economies and coastal ecosystems. And it's a continuing story. I think, again, as I said, the story in the future has to be about productivity increase to keep that seaweed competitive and keep carrageenan competitive with other gums. And it's a story that touches all of our lives. And every December, I'm invited to first grade classes in my town to lecture on scientific careers to first graders and kindergartners. And I'm going to show you 3 slides which I show first graders and kindergartners about how their decisions or what they nag their mother to do can benefit people halfway around the world. So this is, usually I go step by step, but okay, you have a seaweed farmer and he sells seaweed to a carrageenan company, and they'll sell it to an ice cream, the carrageenan to an ice cream company or a toothpaste company, because I tell them, well, you like to eat ice cream? Well, you're eating carrageenan, but you also have to brush your teeth, and that has carrageenan too. And then that's you, okay? And when the farmer, and this is what the kids, first graders get, okay? So when the farmer has money, that allows them, you know, to buy, now that everyone has cell phones in Africa and Asia, farmers are always calling to find out what the price the other buyer is offering. They can buy better food, have better housing, send children to school. In many of these countries, you have to pay tuition. You don't have money, kids don't go to school. And of course, you have access to medical care if you can pay your doctor's bills. So it improves quality of life, okay? And the kids get it. And that's, I guess, one message I'd like to leave with you tonight is your consumer choices have impacts on people's lives halfway around the world, and people who really need their life to have a positive impact. And I thank you.